Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Lockdown Lecture, Strike 2. Thanks all for joining on this uncertain Wednesday evening. So some of you may have listened to the Artemisia lecture that I did back in April, and this one's going to be slightly different. This lecture is going to be in relation to the show currently on at the National Gallery. And I really wanted to focus on Artemisia's work itself, because much has been made of her biography, much has been said very eloquently by the likes of the curator of the show, also Katie Hessel, Michael Palin's done a really great documentary, and I just want to talk more about her paintings. And so this is a bit of an experiment for me as well, because I am going to just try and respond to the images. Maybe all of you know Artemisia's story. She was born in 1593 in Rome to her father Orazio, who was a famous painter. Her mother died when she was 12 in childbirth. And Artemisia was trained by her father and then raped by his colleague Agostino Tassi, a fellow painter, when she was 17 years old, and afterwards a famous trial ensued in which she was tortured and in which she protested her testimony. And so this is kind of the story that often frames her work. I don't want to focus too much on her biography, on her history, because I don't believe that artists make great work because they are the victims of torture or trauma. I think her work is much more than that. And I think often her sensational story can be in danger of illustrating the fantastic paintings that she left behind. So the structure of the talk is going to follow, I think it's 7 rooms that the National Gallery has curated. And I'm kind of going to take each room one at a time and almost try and imagine that we're there together and we're looking at these works. So let's try and figure out why she is a great artist, and let's do that by looking at the works. So if I could ask my wonderful technical assistant to get up the first image, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, so when you walk into the show at the National Gallery, this is the image that confronts you. And this is Susanna and the Elders, painted by Artemisia, probably under the instruction of her father in 1610 when she was 17 years old. And the story of Susanna and the Elders was a very popular one in the early 17th century. And it refers to a biblical story of Susanna, beautiful woman who was married and basically was seduced by 2 elders when she was alone at her bath. And they said to her, if you don't give yourself to us, then we will claim that you committed adultery, for which the sentence was death. So Susanna did resist. The elders then said she committed adultery, she was sentenced to death. At the last moment they were cross-examined. When asked where she committed the adultery, one said under an oak tree, the other said a mastic tree, and so the elders were stoned to death. But of course, painters didn't paint an image of 2 creepy old men getting stoned to death. No. They painted an image of a young woman who was having to endure a sexual assault. And Artemisia was no different in also portraying this episode of the story, but her portrayal is rather different to other versions. If we look at this work by Guercino from 1617, you can see 2 particularly excited elders there on the left-hand side, and then a very statuesque Susanna, unaware of the attempted sexual assault she is soon going to be terrified of. And if you just take for a moment, look at the colours that exist on that left-hand side, blue, red, green, yellow, purple. Guercino's thrown all of the spectrum there. And you know, the elders kind of look to us, we become involved in this scene, you know, somehow legitimizing it. Also, if we take another contemporary, this is the National Gallery's, in the National Gallery's collection by Guido Reni, the Susanna. And you know, this for me is a particularly kind of creepy interpretation because, you know, it's almost Susanna's dilemma that she is somehow tempted, the touch of her hand upon the elder's kind of wrist, almost kind of wondering about, you know, giving herself. And again, just a word on the color. If you look at that red sleeve, the orange, the yellow of Susanna, and that blue, that frames the profile of the elder behind, the primaries all there, and that blue so needed for this painting to work. But you know, Guido Reni, that look in that kind of central elder, the silver-haired elder, is one he obviously perhaps recognized, and maybe the look in the woman's eyes as well. But this kind of deliberation of Susanna, you know, should she kind of give herself to these two men, is certainly not recognized by Artemisia. There is no question that this is a complete desperate rejection of a woman who is a victim of an attempted sexual assault. And if you look at the body, it bends away from these two kind of leering puppets who pop up from beneath this screen, and they're kind of this pile, and that hand that's kind of above that you see really kind of mimics the shape of these two creepy men, the elder on the right, almost appearing like a weasel coming out of a hole. But even Susanna fulfills the brief. She shows us a beautiful kind of female body, which is refreshingly real, especially if you look at Susanna's left breast. It has the weight of a breast, the relationship of that part of the anatomy that is leered over so often to the rest of the body. And when you compare it to other breasts, such as those painted by Guido Reni, two kind of little pimples, these particularly circular ones by Jan Gossart. Another example from the school of Fontainebleau, you know, kind of those, just want to kind of pinch them, but wonders if anyone's actually seen a nipple. And then a particularly crumply nipple by Peter Paul Rubens, and also a nipple that is being pinched by Hendrik Goltzius. But here we have a woman's body observed, seen, understood by a female painter. And the pose of Artemisia, the pose of Susanna that Artemisia uses is perhaps used or taken rather from the Michelangelo work, which is in the Sistine Chapel, that she would surely have known being in her hometown of Rome. And you can kind of see those outstretched arms. And Artemisia uses that pose, but I think develops it brilliantly. You know, the perpendicular nature of the head to the body, and that hand, her hand which is against her kind of neck, and there's that beautiful slit of light above her forearm. Her other hand extends into the space, and actually her left hand into that space, it does enough to command the whole right hand side of that painting as her body leans the other way. It's this zigzag nature. And then as often what Artemisia does is she kind of collects limbs within the center of the composition, and you can see all of those hands within that kind of central upper band of the painting, almost kind of creating a parallelogram and this wonderful communication that is created by them. Also that foot you can see in the water, it shows that the bottom half of her body is somehow frozen. It's not splashing around, but yet the top half leans away. And also just a note on the color, when you see this painting in the flesh, I hadn't seen it until this exhibition, it's this myriad of that purple straight into that green, and then through into ochre and down into red, and then the blue sleeve. So without even realizing it, she's kind of painted this color wheel, and again, the kind of orange looseness of her hair. So at this tender age, Artemisia is showing, supreme understanding of color, form, and how to create a really complex composition where the body bends in this really dramatic and unusual manner. And also, she shows us a woman in distress, not a woman deliberating, not a woman tempted, not a woman aware, a woman saying no. And of course, in some sense, this is a prophetic painting in light of her rape, which happened a few kind of months later. So also in this room, there are two other images of women, and one is Danae, which is in reference to a story of Danae is a woman who is imprisoned by her father, King Acrisius, after he tells a prophecy, after he hears a prophecy telling him that he will be murdered at the hand of her offspring. So she is locked away, but Zeus, ever cunning, manages to transform himself into a shower of coins and impregnate her. So really, we are looking at, if you like, a painting of a rape, albeit a rather imaginative one. And this pose is also used in Cleopatra. And these two kind of images of women are somehow in stark contrast with the Susanna, which kind of feels somehow much more natural. This is almost how women maybe feel that men want to see them. It's that awkward pose. You can imagine there's an immaturity about it, trying to get into a position on a bed and be kind of alluring and seductive. And so kind of doing this slightly kind of bent back pose. And it actually made me think of contemporary images of women that you often see across the likes of Instagram and various other sites and magazines. This is Bella Hadid, who is a kind of supermodel, and it's that kind of awkward leaning back, which I really recognized in the Artemisia painting. And I think it's interesting, this first room within the show, that you have these two kind of portrayals of women, because although Artemisia, of course, is a female painter, she is also, understands what people want from painting, and she wants to have a successful career as an artist. So it's not straightforward to think that she just painted empowering images of women. She also painted very seductive ones. And if you go into the next room, it's so thrilling to see the two versions of Judith and Holofernes side by side in the National Gallery. So the one on the left is from a collection in Naples, and the one on the right is usually in the Uffizi in Florence. And these paintings were painted after the trial, after Tassi had been found guilty and he had been exiled, although it was never kind of enforced. And so Artemisia is quickly married, and she starts again, she starts her career as a legitimate married woman. And the nature of these paintings, they're so sensational because she has this story that surely would have followed her. And, like Kim Kardashian with her sex tape, which then thrust her into the public eye, she capitalizes on her notoriety. She doesn't shed away from it, and perhaps offers an image that will elevate her profile in terms of how it will sit within her personal narrative. So Judith is the story from the Bible. Judith was another very popular theme at the beginning of the 17th century, and it shows Judith and her servant Abra, and they have decided to go in and cut the head of Holofernes after his Assyrian forces have had put her hometown under siege. And so rather than do nothing, Judith turns up in her finery. She spends 4 days with Holofernes, and on the kind of fourth day, she plies him with alcohol. She doesn't remove any clothing, but she manages, through his kind of inebriated state, to overpower him, to cut off his head, to bring it back to enemy lines, to place it on a spike. His troops see his head, freak out, and think, how the hell did that happen? I'm out of here. Well done, Judith. Well, that's not quite how many people saw it, many men saw it, because Judith wasn't seen so much as a heroine, she was more seen as a warning. And if you look at works by other artists, this is Cristofano Allori, his work from 1613, she was seen as a dangerous seductress. This work by Johann Lis, which is in the National Gallery, I love this work, it's so fun to paint because it's like this kind of whirlwind of fabric, and you can see she's just dropping the head of Holofernes into a basket, the blood still spurting. I love how kind of sunburnt his hand seems to be as well. And she looks back going, yeah, and sure, I did this. And it's, you know, she's kind of evil, but not as evil as Rubens as Judith with her nipple poking out, you know, and that light on her. These really are seen as quite dangerous figures who are not seen as heroes for liberating their town. And Virginia Vesey, another female painter at the time, hers is a little more smug, a little more knowing, and kind of mischievous. And also Elisabetta Serrani's later version from 1660, also of Judith and Holofernes, but you know, this quite a delicate, beautiful young woman dreamily gazing out, and there's just a few kind of trails of blood to indicate the violence that has occurred. Whereas Artemisia's version is much, much more bold. And you can see this in her, this is the second version. So the first, we think, was cut down, made in Naples, and that perhaps this second version she made to kind of, you know, she improved it through this more elaborate dress and these primary colors, which are much bolder than the other version. Also, Judith seems much more determined. Her brow is rather furrowed. Her shoulder is up high. And, you know, what Artemisia is showing the viewer is really how this was done, how two women overpowered a man and cut his head off. The other versions seem implausible. This is somehow plausible. And you can see, almost especially in the earlier version, the life draining out of Holofernes. His eyes, you feel like you can almost see them start to glaze over. And to compare them in the National Gallery is such a treat. It's because you can actually start to see why perhaps one works better than the other. And it's perhaps useful kind of to focus on the second one in terms of composition. The thing that she's included more blood, she's included the elaborate dress, but also she's extended that sword. It's kind of much shorter in the second one, and it doesn't have that driving force straight down the center of the painting. Because if you actually look at this in terms of formal qualities, it's such a tour de force. Those two parallel outstretched arms of Judith that fan out from the center of Holofernes' head, that sword that comes straight down, and his arm that also goes up towards Abra's face, this line straight down, and then his legs fan out from the other side, and you have this rich red, then you have the blue and those pink turn-ups from the sleeves, and then the yellow of Judith and the red again of her kind of rolled up sleeves, and then the bottom is this, you know, lightness, the top this dark. So just in terms of how Artemisia has interpreted this well-rehearsed theme that's gone over and over again, she's portrayed it with such force, such brutality, but also created this really sophisticated composition that really works in these three bands, and it works brilliantly. And you can feel the textures as well, the hair that is gripped between her fingers, those smudged sheets that have been the result of the body kind of writhing, even just those kind of hairs or the trim on the bedspread, and that rich elaborate dress which feels so heavy. So there's so much to appreciate within this work. And on the wall next to it is another version of the same story, but a later episode. So here the deed has been done. and the women are about to make their escape, but they pause as the sound is heard. So it's that real tense moment. There's been great movement, and then there's this real moment of stillness as danger is kind of identified. And in the first room is Orazio, her father's version. And you can actually, in the National Gallery show, you can actually see them both in the same eye line. So you can see the comparison between them, that Artemisia has used Orazio's composition, but she, you know, this kind of mirroring, but she has somehow used the frame so much more kind of eloquently than he has. Orazio uses this beautiful, sumptuous color, that blue arm. And again, we have the pretty much the full spectrum, the red dress, the orange, the green background. And also the detail of the head, you see that blood dribbling through the basket, and also the smudges on the cloth, and you just see that detail of the jewelry. But as an overall image, you know, it lacks the drama. You don't believe that Judith in the red dress has just lopped the head of Holofernes. She seems a little bit kind of, just, you know, just maybe we should leave. There's no real drama there. Whereas Artemisia has that intensity. And also she uses space so much better. If you look at Orazio's version, the arm of Judith is by her side, you know, almost just dropping that sword, you somehow release all the energy, where again, Artemisia is bringing the limbs up into the center. And this, you know, the swagger, the sword on the kind of on the shoulder, and it brings it in tight and tense. Whereas the space either side of the painting in Orazio's version isn't charged, it's not doing anything. And it's kind of a mismanagement of the frame, which Artemisia doesn't have an issue with. Also in room 2 are these three paintings. Again, brilliant to see them all together. And it's quite a fun kind of opportunity to compare and contrast them. So if we start with the lute player, I love the contrast of this painting from a woman who kind of seems really fed up, but she's kind of got her bust on show, and she's like, yeah, hi, yeah, okay, you know, I am this woman who is going to be lusted after, but I also have a mind, and I am, you know, I am not happy. I'm not happy with the attention I am receiving, even though it has been, in a sense, encouraged by me. You know, the kind of ruddiness of her cheek, that really determined stare. You can even almost hear her sigh before she begins playing her instrument. And Artemisia has framed all of this so beautifully within the confines of the canvas. And just the hands, you know, that right hand at that beautiful angle, and the left, and they just have this relationship, this distance. And art historians often reference how it was Artemisia's hands that were tortured in the trial, and that so in her paintings they seem to be so engaged and so present as tools and as things that are used. And you know, that does absolutely ring true. And also just looking at the colour of this dress, this blue in beautiful contrast with the ochre sash at her waist, the lute, and also just those two lines of common orange ochre that are in the scarf around her head, and that blackness, that darkness behind. Again, you know, referencing the light of Caravaggio, but Artemisia makes it all look so effortless in this painting. And also that left arm that's with its fingers on the strings, it's really foreshortened, but it'd be so hard to paint, but she makes it look effortless. So a wonderful, wonderful painting. And next we have the painting acquired by the National Gallery, and Artemisia has clearly used similar composition, but she's kind of elevated the genre by showing us the figure cast as St. Catherine of Alexandria, her hand on the wheel that she was tortured upon, the palm, a symbol of her martyrdom. But here we have a more refined figure. Even the colours seem more kind of more musty, more like a library full of intellect. But again, it's this beautiful kind of bringing in of the hands, and again, supremely engaged. The look as well is more gentle, but it's a look of intensity, it's a look of thought. And that palm, just that space between the palm and her face, beautifully considered, and the space behind, which is much lighter than we see that darkness behind her head. So everything kind of working beautifully within the confines of the frame. If we move on to the painting, again of St. Catherine, you can see the wheel. This a work that's usually in the Uffizi, but it's, for me, by far the weakest work. Her gaze, which drifts off, it leads us elsewhere, out of the picture plane. It doesn't direct us back in. We just kind of lose it. There are beautiful things that occur within the work. This kind of crumpled nature of the her dress and that green against the red, also, you know, that hand. But as an overall work, it's just not as successful as the other two. It somehow, it loses its energy. And it's interesting to say that in terms of, is it just down to a gaze, a direction of a gaze? If she did look out towards us, would that be enough? I'm not sure, perhaps, but you know, these are the things that make paintings great, not the story, the narrative behind them. It's actually the impact that we subconsciously receive as soon as we stand in front of them. And seeing these works all next to one another in the National Gallery is fantastic to see, because you can compare and contrast successes and failures within paintings, within a repeated composition, which you're not often able to do. So moving into room 3, this is when kind of Artemisia has moved from Florence and she's now in Rome. And she is having great success in Rome. She is still with her husband, but has a lover, Maranghi, and there are some letters in this room that Artemisia writes to Maranghi, which are rather saucy. She says something like, please don't masturbate, please wait until we're together and you can experience the real deal. So it really kind of shows the passion of her affair. Her husband also even writes to Maranghi to kind of show off about how their house is frequented by cardinals and princes. So, you know, it's a prosperous time. And although many of Artemisia's more kind of formal portraits don't exist, we can assume that she made many. And this is one of them in 1622. And to be honest, this room in the show, for me, is not a particularly exciting one. You know, this is Artemisia, as all artists often do, fulfilling a brief. You know, she's working for commissions, so work such like this from 1622. You can see it's quite formal. It's also perhaps influenced by the likes of Van Dyck, who was working at the same time in Naples for similar patrons. And also she creates works like this. Again, you know, quite a formal work. This is Lady with a Fan. And you know, you feel that she is being dictated by the market, which makes complete sense, because she is a business woman. She needs to make money, and so she needs to secure commissions. But as works, they feel almost quite as if she's going through the motion. And this, you know, dilemma between perhaps artistic integrity and curiosity and the need to work is one that artists today continually battle with. And it's something I'll probably come back to a little later. So as we move through this room, which is room 3, we enter into room 4 in the National Gallery, which they have titled The Female Hero. Boom, you have Lucretia. And this was a painting I personally was most excited to see in this exhibition. Basically because I'm obsessed with her massive knee. I just think the power and the physicality of this work is so refreshing. So here, Artemisia again is painting a very popular theme in the Baroque period, which was Lucretia. And Lucretia was a figure who was raped, and she was raped by a man who was jealous of basically how good a wife she was to her husband. And so he thought he would rape her. And she was completely devastated, ashamed, and she told her husband and I think her father, her brother, who all believed her, but she still couldn't live with the shame, and so she committed suicide. So she plunged a knife into her chest. And often previous artists have created the image of Lucretia, slightly more sexy, dagger between her bosom in this kind of almost like erotically charged composition. Whereas Artemisia shows us, again, this dilemma. She hasn't committed the dagger to her chest yet. She's thinking, she's pondering. And I love to think in this version, the next scene, she puts it down and she leaves her husband and goes and hangs out with her friends down the road or something. But this is Artemisia again, reimagining, kind of putting new life into these well-rehearsed themes. And it's just her use of the frame again, how it becomes these limb, her arm following her knee, and also that arm that grabs her nipple. I actually hadn't noticed that. I hadn't seen it until I was in the National Gallery a few weeks ago, and I was drawing this painting because I was so excited to see it. I got told off after half an hour. So I've been going for quite a while, and then they said, sorry, you can't draw in here. Fair enough. But I still managed to see the nipple which she grasps between her fingers. So it's this kind of real ownership of her body, which I just absolutely love. And again, the simplicity of it, just the background blankness, that light that cascades onto her revealed shoulder, that red, rich robe, which we saw kind of earlier in Judith and Holofernes, and just like gazing up. This time, the figure is gazing up, but unlike the earlier St. Catherine, it works brilliantly because you have the dagger and you almost imagine it kind of crossing the gaze straight up. So it's pure genius. And this painting is next to Cleopatra. No, it's not Cleopatra, it's Mary Magdalene in Ecstasy. And again, thinking about, shape within the frame, you can see how both of these paintings use it so well. I had the pleasure of going to the National Gallery with a dear friend and fellow artist, and she was observing how Mary Magdalene kind of slices the painting in half. I mean, it's two triangles, the body contained in the bottom half, and just this black expanse in the top, and that head kind of bent right back. The pose reminiscent of an earlier Caravaggio work, but again, Artemisia has moved it on, and she has kind of developed it. Also, this is a nice opportunity to see this blouse. You can see it has these little triangles that go around all around the edge. And you see this particular blouse again and again within Artemisia's paintings, a bit like from Rembrandt's work when you see props that come up again and again. Similarly, this blouse is one that repeats. But anyway, we have this figure lean back, creating this incredible shape within the frame. Again, restrained color, but this complementary purple and yellow, which is underneath. And on the opposite wall, again, a fantastic comparison. In the National Gallery, I have to say they've done a fantastic job of hanging this show, because often when they do kind of large shows of individual artists, they kind of pile quite a lot of other works of other painters, and they really haven't done this with Artemisia. I think there's one painting by Simon Vouet, which is a self-portrait of Artemisia, and a few by her father, but that's pretty much it. And they have also done this brilliant pairing of works. So it is a great show to go and see, just so you can, see both kind of images within your kind of one vision to really compare and contrast. So on the left here, we have another Judith and her maidservant, and then on the right we have another Susanna and the elders. So if we start with this work, which is usually in Detroit, from around 1623, and again we have the escape, and it's charged with kind of more drama than the earlier one, as this this halting, and that drama, that hand, which seems, close to burn against the flame of the candle, but of course we know it is separated by space, and that dramatic shadow that is cast across Judith's face as Abra too, as she kind of pauses and kind of looks, but it's that look when you're looking to listen, you're looking to listen, you're not looking to see, because we can see how pitch dark, pitch black the tent is. And we can see at the bottom that Abra is bundling the head of Holofernes kind of into a blanket. And you can see that it's almost fragmented by light, and it's very green. So again, if we look at colour, it's all here. That kind of green head, the blue skirt of Abra, her violet arms, you have the yellow dress, you have that green top on the table, and that dramatic red that sweeps down. Also, if we look at the shapes within this painting, Judith's head, her shoulder, and then that kind of round gathering of fabric to pull her dress up, which mirrors the headdress of Abra, the maidservant, as well. So this fantastic collection of shape. Also, Artemisia's done this thing again of crossing limbs. So one arm goes out and the other comes back with the sword, and this sword kind of points in to the darkness. So although in a sense the action is quite narrow, and we have these swathes of darkness either side, she's managed to orchestrate it in such a way that it works as a whole. And just the theatre of it, this, you imagine this motion, pause, and the light, it's just full of drama. And I was, again, one of those works I was so excited to see in this exhibition. And also you can see her repeating poses. So this you can see kind of mirrored in Abra, which is used in a later work, but we'll come back to this painting. But you can see that something really changed later on in Artemisia's career. Gone is the Caravaggio light, which has been replaced by these landscapes. But here, in this earlier work, you still see the drama and the intensity of light and the confidence of Artemisia in how she is framing these women in kind of sisterly corroboration as they plan to make their escape. So on the other side, we have another Susanna. And this work, I was lucky enough last year when I was preparing for the Artemisia lecture at the Slade, I was lucky to spend quite a lot of time with it in a corridor in Burghley House, which is where it usually is. And again, we have these two leering men, which we know only too well from the earlier Artemisia painting of Susanna. But this time, they're kind of on one-sided, piled above one another. And Susanna, again, is in distress, but perhaps it's a slightly kind of more titillating painting, but it's a kind of a lopsided painting in my mind. Perhaps the right side there's so much going on with the figures, and then the left side is this kind of more Bolognese inspired landscape that was starting to become more fashionable. So gone are these kind of blackouts in the manner of Caravaggio, and in are coming these more elaborate kind of sculptural gardens with these blue skies and clouds, which is Artemisia is obviously trying to adapt her practice, her style, to suit the market and also the demands of her clientele, but it's not confidently resolved. The pose also is similar to Lucretia. You see, it's that kind of, covering up. But whereas Lucretia works so well within the frame, the Susanna, it just doesn't seem to have that same power. And it's, that kind of struggle that an artist has when you move on your painting, when you move on your work and you try new things, it's difficult. Things don't work. And you get so invested in them, you can't see a way out, you can't see a solution. But there are beautiful moments within this work. The sleeve that trails on the water and you see that reflection. Also the kind of the string of her blouse as well, that almost kind of drips down, and her earrings. And you can see this kind of Rubenesque flare of the highlights of her eyes as she looks up, and these golden touches of her curls. So some really beautiful things going on, but as a complete image, it doesn't quite work as a whole. And as you move into the room 5, so this room is kind of organized to kind of contain works from around 1630. After 3 years in Venice, Artemisia moves to Naples, where she largely remained. She likely left Venice to escape the plague, and she comes to Naples, and she makes this, which is her first public commission and altarpiece for Naples. Naples is one of the biggest artistic centers in Europe at that time, so all of the kind of artists are there, and she's working very closely with other artists and very much within their community. And you can see the kind of influence of them. This is a work by Paolo Fingoglia. This is the Annunciation from the 1630s, and you can see the kind of correspondence between the two. Artemisia is also, you know, she was doing these single kind of more figures, or 2-3 figures, and now she's, you know, doing these multi-figure arrangements, which is always incredibly difficult. It's, you know, to organize so many different elements to a painting, and also, you know, convey a sense of focus or drama. And you can see there's a slight kind of disparity of scale with the figure kneeling to Christ and Mary, who seem very small, and then the other kind of king behind seeming much bigger, and then these figures in the background. It's all a little bit of in focus, out of focus, and not quite kind of working. You know, even artists such as the great, you know, Velázquez, also working in Naples at the time, you know, this is his Triumph of Bacchus, having problems with multi-figured arrangements, you know, doing single portraits of monarchs, but then trying to get all these elements to work together. And you see that kind of figure crouching down on the left, which just seems kind of rather raw and kind of flat. And then that kind of swathe of fabric that's on the other side, it doesn't quite kind of work, quite add up. I mean, there's incredible moments, just look at that face, so raw and from life, of the man staring out. And then we have Bacchus kind of wishing that he wasn't really there. Rubens, I mean, to be honest, not a favorite of mine, but a master in terms of organizing figures within the frame. You know, Rubens is someone who did these incredible drawings that were scaled up by his assistants, and he had the ability to create all these kind of complex interactions on a colossal scale. This painting is almost 3 meters wide. So the issue of scaling up is always problematic for artists. You know, even in the studio now, you may have a great idea, but to actually keep its quality on a large scale is difficult. And I think this is something Artemisia found as well. And also, as she began to have other elements within her work, so architecture and these kind of lines that you can see within this is St. Januarius from 1636, and later Lot and his daughters from 1636, a more kind of confident work, but not one that's particularly dynamic. I mean, I love the kind of the legs that are in these kind of parallel shapes and this kind of stripe and zigzag of color, but again, not particularly enthralling. And if we go back to this David and Bathsheba from 1636, it is likely, well, I think it is written that the figures were painted by Artemisia, the architecture by Viviano Codazzi, the sky and landscape background by Domenico Gargulo. So 3 artists working on one canvas, you know, collaboration can be a wonderful thing, but it can also dilute one's idea and artistic vision. And so, you know, I really feel for Artemisia within these rooms that she's trying to adapt her practice, move with the times, keep up with other people. You know, I think it's so hard to imagine how competitive an environment this would have been, not just for an artist, but for a woman, you know, working in that time. And, you know, I know myself as an artist, your confidences can be knocked by, you know, the rising stars of others, and to be able to stay on track and just, you know, just try and maintain a genuine curiosity. But she was running her own studio, she was in charge of her own affairs. She had a daughter to support after 4 of her other children died. 2, I think, when they were days old, 1 when they were 9 months old, and her boy Cristofano when he was 4 years old. Her daughter Prudentia survives, and perhaps also trained with her in the studio, was also a painter. And so, you know, Artemisia has so much that she's trying to juggle and trying to do. And for me, walking through these rooms, it felt quite raw, almost not tragic, because I don't want to sound like I'm pitying her, because I'm not, but I recognize her struggle as trying to evolve her practice by scaling up more figures, changing her background to suit the market that she's so kind of desperate to secure commissions within. When you're dealing with the likes of Rubens, Velasquez, Van Dyck, all these incredible painters, you know, these men who would have had the upper hand, obviously because of their sex and their ability to make these connections. So these kind of, this room, although the paintings for me aren't as kind of exciting as works, but it really shows the kind of the reality of the artist. And also that's why retrospectives are great, because you see, you know, work kind of move through. Not everyone can be Matisse and still be cutting incredible collages into their 90s. You know, artists have peaks and troughs within their career. And so if we move into the into room 6, and this is the birth of St. John the Baptist from 1635. Again, you know, a lot of these faces to me seem very unconvincing. I wonder perhaps her daughter helped her on some of them, I don't know. But it doesn't have the confidence of the earlier works. You know, these large kind of groupings, these large scale works, there's some beautiful moments, this crouching figure on the bottom right, but as a whole, it isn't quite as successful. And, you know, this fabric, the shimmering fabric, beautiful things going on. But a painting needs to work as a complete, coherent impression. And some of these works feel lacking. And again, these quite generic themes. This is Corsica and the Satire. You can see that kind of beautiful blouse there, but they're just not that enthralling. And personally, as a viewer, I find it harder to get excited about them. Wertschutz's Cleo, I think, is an interesting piece to observe in terms of its technique. Again, you feel Artemisia is trying to move things on, she's trying new things, and perhaps is influenced by Velasquez and his use of paint, which is often very kind of loose. And he does, you know, this incredible satin shimmer from his painting of Pope Innocent X. And, you know, imagine Artemisia seeing all these things and trying new things, trying to keep up, when actually maybe if she just could, you know, confidently stay true to her own artistic vision. But who am I to say? I don't know. She did a great job. And then in the final room of the exhibition, we have this work, which is an earlier work and a huge work painted by Artemisia. It's 273 centimeters in length, and it was painted when she was in Venice, and clearly influenced by the likes of Veronese. And this is kind of Esther, who has been on hunger strike, and she is fainting before her husband. And again, like, you see Artemisia trying to resolve this work, and the problem I think she has with it is the space in between. And you can actually see that originally she included, you can kind of see the 2 legs of a dog, which were on that bottom step. You see these 2 light lines, and there was also, if you see the knee, and then there's a kind of shape, there was a small boy who was also included in the composition. And then she's decided that she's not going to use them and take it all out. So, you know, I imagine her trying and, you know, trialing these things and just thinking it's not quite right. But she started on this incredibly huge canvas. She has, you know, painted this sumptuous color and fabric. And this use of space within painting, you know, it really is the artist's talent in terms of how they use it. And it really made me think of successful abstract paintings, which is why I thought this Helen Frankenthaler painting called Small's Paradise from 1964 is kind of useful to think about when we're looking at this painting, because if you're an abstract painter or if you're a figurative painter, you're still dealing with color and shape within space, and you're still dealing with kind of distance and how much distance to give forms. And I think this work is incredible. I love this. But it's because all of the colors, all of the shapes have the right space and distance from one another, and they also all work within the frames. And you can apply this to the Artemisia work, you know, this not quite having that correct distance, that correct space. When you think back to works like Lucretia, you know, she does achieve that fantastically well. There are also kind of works like Barnett Newman as well. This is his Adam from 1951. You think about those lines, and that's, you know, those spaces, and millimeters count. There's not a science to it, it's interpretive. And, you know, a drop of blue or a drop of red counts for when it works. You know, people talk about abstract painting being easy. You can't make a bad abstract painting. I'm afraid you can make a bad abstract painting, and this is what you can get. No disrespect to the person who made this. If you type abstract painting into Google Images, because really within figurative painting, you're dealing with the same things. You're trying to figure out how shapes, forms, colors lock into one another and create space that speaks and creates tension and guides your eye around the scene, whatever it may be within the frame, through some kind of journey, some way that feels meaningful and you have a response to, just in the same way as you do with abstract painting. And so this work, you know, I feel for Artemisia, and there are these wonderful moments of colour. But it's great to see also in the final room in the National Gallery that we are shown her famous Allegory of Painting, which, I mean, perhaps was painted in England, perhaps painted before. You know, to me, it's the last room of this exhibition, but it feels like it has the confidence of the earlier works. And we see her poised, looking out towards her subject, which seems to radiate light back to her. She has her paintbrush on the canvas and she's about to begin. So it's a really magical moment. And she is portraying herself, Artemisia the painter, but also she is the Allegory of Painting. We can see the pendant around her neck, which kind of alludes to this. And the Allegory of Painting was traditionally represented by a woman with kind of dark tousled hair, which you can also see. So Artemisia finally using her sex to her advantage. And she uses the weave of the canvas to depict the object that she is painting upon, and also, she uses the weave to depict the object we're looking at, but it was also the object we are gazing upon, the canvas itself. So this really kind of clever use of illusion within the work. And also, if you're talking about space, you know, she absolutely nails space within this work, because you have this huge swathe of blank canvas, but it works brilliantly. It's charged between her arms, it's charged between, you know, against her body. And it's not this kind of dead space which can occur within other paintings. And the color is so restrained. You have this ochre bodice and dress, and the beautiful green dress, and her luminous skin, her dark kind of tousled hair, and these violets which run through her sleeve as well, displaying this virtuoso technique that would qualify an artist's talent. So for me, this painting it's one when you walk into a room and you go, oh, wow, because the angle of the face is so extreme as well. And it's just, she is so kind of clever in the fact that she is showing us two time frames. She's showing us those moments just as the painting is about to begin, but then she shows us the finished product as we look at the work that she has finished. She also shows us the intellect of the artist as she's receiving information from her subject and it's processed by the mind. And Mary Garrard, the great Artemisia biographer, makes reference to this work in light of Las Meninas, which is by Velázquez. And Velázquez would, very, very likely he did know Artemisia. He came and visited her in her studio. And so it's likely that he would have seen potentially her work. She makes reference to the image, a self-portrait, in the image of the artist in a letter of 1630. Velázquez left Naples 3 days later, so it's likely he could have seen her work in the studio. And Las Meninas was painted in 1656, so why make the connection between this work by Artemisia and this work by Velázquez? Well, Velázquez was wanting to elevate the status of painters, and unlike Artemisia, he couldn't show himself to be the Allegory of Painting and an artist himself because he was a man, the Allegory of Painting was a woman, nor could he paint himself surrounded by studio paraphernalia because it would somehow devalue his enterprise as craft when he's trying to elevate it to intellectual pursuit. So he perhaps takes inspiration from Artemisia, showing the artist at work the canvas, but not revealing what it is they are working upon. So here we see Velázquez in his studio. He is painting a large canvas. We can't see what it is. The Infanta, the princess, is there in the middle. She's been handed some water by a lady in waiting who has not noticed, unlike everybody else in the room, that perhaps the king and queen have just entered and they can be seen reflected in the mirror. And Velázquez looks out from his canvas work to see the arrival of the king and queen, likely a reflection rather than a portrait on the back wall, judging by the way that he's painted it, by the light. And so Velázquez has managed to show his close relationship to the king and queen by depicting himself alongside them, not by physically placing them within the studio, which would seem rather informal to have them surrounded by his brushes, his paints, but they are eternally present as viewers come in front of this painting. As we stand in front of it, we are cast as the king and queen. So Velázquez has taken Artemisia's kind of idea and taken it a step further. She is showing us the beginning and the kind of end, these two time frames, but she's not revealing her subject matter. And Velázquez too understands the power of not revealing his subject matter as the canvas is turned away from us. It is the same dimensions as Las Meninas. So are we looking at the painting that Velázquez is working upon? But how could that be if he is looking at us? And similarly, Artemisia, is she painting the work that we are looking upon? So you can see how Velázquez potentially used her concept and developed it. But perhaps we will never know. Artemisia will never get the credit for providing the idea for what is often called the greatest painting ever made. But I do think it's a connection that's worth making. So are there artworks, or are there just artists? I think this is the question that Gombrich poses in his history of art. And I think it's an important question because Artemisia so much becomes the artist that her artworks illustrate herself. But I think it's really important to stop and to pause and to look at them and to recognize the successes and failures in terms of how she applies paint, how she actually works light, figure and form into the canvas, because she is so much more than her story, so much more than her biography. And of course, she reigns supreme in incredibly challenging times due to her sex, but it's how she actually contains all of the information. She reinterprets subjects and she turns them into things that have yet to be seen within Western painting. And I just hope she's finally getting the credit she deserves. So thank you for listening.